Hey gang, hope life's treating you well. It's treating me well. Things are good. I've got my lucky t-shirt on. I love this t-shirt. I got it from an op shop probably more than a decade ago. So it's got all these holes in it and it's falling apart. And it just reminds me of how precious it is that we get as much time on this earth as we do if we're lucky. And I'm also wearing my little microphone on the clips on the inside today. I saw an Italian chap on YouTube doing that, and I just realized I'd never thought to do that. And there are so many things in life like that where once you see someone do it or they point it out to you, then it's just obvious that's the better way of doing things. And your life can be improved immeasurably by just incrementally accruing a bunch of these little nuggets of wisdom. So that's what I'm hoping this channel can be for you or for someone at least. And it definitely is for me as well, weirdly. I seem to learn things from myself because this channel encourages me to think things through a little bit. So I want to discuss a topic near and dear to my heart today, which is death metal. And I just want to say it's totally fine if you're not into death metal. I think you'll probably still find this video interesting. But as a little bit of context, what inspired this video is that my arguably favorite death metal band, and probably favorite band actually, Opeth, are about to release a new album, and they haven't done death metal vocals for their last few albums, and so now it's coming back after they're bringing the death metal vocals back after about 15 years, and it's creating a big stir in the fan base. And so what I want to kind of do here today as a connoisseur of, if you like, of death metal is to try and give fans and non-fans my take on what's special about death metal and how we can view that in the context of this upcoming Opeth record and the opinions and feelings that I predict the audience and the band will have about the reception of the actual album. So, what is special about death metal? So for those who are completely ignorant about what death metal is, it is a style of music in which the vocalist, instead of singing in a conventional way, la-di-da, ba-ba, black sheep style, they speak like this, they sing like this, or like this, or many other ways. And now, this is immediately a turn off to most people, right? And I get that, I really do. I think that, like many acquired tastes, there's a degree to which people up front are put off by this. They have probably like a visceral reaction, something like, I don't want to be screamed at while I'm listening to my music. You know, I listen to music to relax, or I listen to music to engage with the melodies, and this is just noise. If you ever catch yourself saying, like, responding consciously to a genre of music by saying it's just noise, you can be sure that what that actually translates to in a greater meta way is that you're just ignorant of what's good about the music. And that's not a criticism. I'm just saying it's an invitation for you to try and reach a greater insight. But it's also completely fine if it's just not your thing. I mean, not all music is going to be everybody's thing, right? But what's interesting, I find, about death metal and what it offers to songwriters and arrangers who partake in it is that So let's start with something I made reference to in a video I made a few videos back called Magical Creativity, the VSM approach, in which I basically postulated that there's something special about human vocals, like having a human singing or vocalizing, I suppose, on a track or a song gives it this really unique injection or infusion of power that is very difficult to emulate in any other way, which is why most pop, like 99.9% of pop music has vocals, right? And even electronic musicians who make all of their beats on a computer will often reach for a sample of a vocalist, even if it's just a very simple, like a few words or even just like a syllable, and then they sample it around. They'll usually do that. And again, in terms of electronic music that you hear, like on the radio or etc., like I'm thinking of like Flume, I guess, but there's like obviously countless examples. Like they're using vocals to produce to give the tracks disproportionate power. And so, you know, I think when it comes to metal and all genres, there's no exceptions here. You have to work much harder to make a track impactful without vocals, okay? So as an arranger, that sort of writes you into a corner because if you're going to have vocals and you know they're going to command a disproportionate amount of the listener's attention, that limits what else you can do with the arrangement intrinsically, because especially if it's a melodic vocal line, you want to make the rest of the arrangement mostly focusing on percussion, rhythm, and harmony that sits under that melody line, because otherwise, if there's other melodies going on, they start to clash. And you have to be extremely careful about that, because it's very quickly becomes busy and too busy, and it becomes impossible for the audience to know what they're supposed to focus on, and so they can't really settle into the music, right? And this happens, you know, this, like, there are analogies to photography here, right? Like there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, but there's usually a subject, which is like the thing that's in focus. So in this shot, I'm really the subject, right? I have the guitars everywhere. If all the guitars were swinging and doing and trying to say things, and like, can you imagine how quickly it would just become really jarring? Like, you're focusing on me. There's also Chimbles, like he's wandering around, he might come, you know, at some point. But you sort of have to introduce new characters and be really careful about how you do it. So when there's a vocalist doing a melody, probably nothing else should be doing a melody. That's why when the vocalist finished in classic rock, right, you might have like a guitar solo, but you don't have a guitar solo usually while the vocalist is also singing, unless they're very specifically like lining things up so that they both like are doing like a duet type of thing, like you hear Axl Rose and Slash doing that in a lot of like classic Guns N' Roses stuff. So what if you want to do something else then as an arranger or an artist, but you still want to keep the power of vocals? Well, one option is what hip hop does. And hip hop is another, you know, genre which people accuse of like being just noise, or like it's too repetitive or whatever. But what hip hop does is to have the vocalist not focus on melody. And usually in a lot of beats, like especially from like the golden age of hip hop, the beat does have a melody, but it's a melody that repeats over and over again, so it kind of fades into the background. And so since we're not focusing on melody, we can focus on the percussive feel and also the lyrical message. Okay, so then, so rap is a way of sidestepping this, pathological melodization of the vocals in favor of hopefully lyrical content, at least in the verses, and then maybe you'll have like a sung part in the chorus or something, right? And you have like beat poetry, which is arguably like a precursor to this. You can have like spoken word stuff over instrumentals. These play by the same rules. But an alternative is death metal. So what death metal does, when I speak like this, I'm intentionally removing the melody from my voice, if you like. So there's still a tonal aspect. There are still pitches. I can still move from one pitch to another, but it works a bit like percussion. Like if I was to do like a little, there are changes in pitch which you're detecting, but the part of your brain that tries to generate, that tries to receive and a melody from it is not really paying, it's not working, right? It's not having to pay attention to that. So a melody could be added to that. This is the magic of death metal. This is what death metal allows for, potentially, because now you have a situation where the chorus and the verses and musical sections which contain vocal content are not, the vocals are not commanding the melodic attention of the listener. Instead, the vocals take on the quality really of a percussion instrument. The lyrics become almost imperceptible. Like they almost don't matter. There are some people who focus on death metal vocals, but again, there are criticisms of it, and they say, I can't understand what they're saying. And again, I would argue that actually has a sort of evolutionary purpose, that the music is encouraging you to not focus on the lyrical or melodic content of the vocalist, of the vocal performance. So this is a huge deal for you if you're a musician who's trying to write melodic verses or choruses with instruments. Okay, so you have a classic example I would say would be the Black Dahlia Murder. If you go and listen to their album Miasma, there are many examples of this, but this is really where you get the idea of what's called melodic death metal. Okay, so there are heaps of bands who do this. But yeah, go check out Black Dahlia Murder, Miasma, and you'll see what I mean when I say that it really sounds almost like Vivaldi, except there's heaps of distortion on everything. There's a drummer doing like crazy blast beats, like insanely fast and complex rhythms, and then you've also got a vocalist who is, growling, howling, screaming over the top of it. And again, someone who has sort of like classical music tastes is going to go, oh, so you mean it's like Vivaldi but bad, right? And yeah, maybe if that's your taste, I totally respect that opinion, but I just think you have to qualify that you're speaking from a position of ignorance of the appreciation of an acquired taste, or an acquired art form, if you like. And that for me, when I experience it, I actually find it very exciting and also in a lot of ways relaxing because of how engaging it is, in the same way that Vivaldi's music, for example, is. But it also has this additional injection of percussive rhythmic energy from the vocals and the drums. So very rich melodic harmonic structure coming through in the guitars, and then rich percussive rhythmic qualities coming through in the drums and vocals. And this is a very special mix of things. Like this doesn't happen in like pop music or like conventional songwriting. Now, that doesn't mean it never happens, right? Like, I personally think that there was sort of like a golden era of arrangement where we had very rich vocal melodies that were actually really coexisting with incredible instrumental melodies, just through the ingenuity of the arrangers, right? So I think of bands like Queen, ELO, the Beatles. So you can definitely have pop music that sort of works around this in another way while still maintaining melodic vocals. But death metal solves the problem in a really interesting way. So if you can get past the kind of, I don't want to be screamed at, knee-jerk reaction of kind of feeling like it's ugly or whatever, if you actually get into it and you start to really like appreciate it for what it is, you'll actually find it's an oddly peaceful feeling listening to death metal. And again, I'm saying that as someone who's been listening to it for a very long time, and I listen to it in all kinds of ways. So now, I feel like that's a good rundown of why it is a unique art form and why it's something that I think most music appreciators should really give a go. If you have eclectic taste in music, the chances are you'll have some capacity to appreciate it. But now we're going to work around to the second part of the video, which is about a band that I love and their kind of strange relationship with their fan base since they stopped doing death metal. But also I think it's a strange relationship they have with their songwriting. Because Opeth is a Swedish melodic death metal band historically. I would say that's how they were kind of genreified. And in my opinion, some of the best music ever written. If you're looking for a sample of that, I would say go listen to Ghost Reveries. It's an album they released in 2005, and you'll see a lot of what I'm talking about. You'll listen to it, and in the first like few seconds, you'll be shocked because there's a guy screaming at you. And then you'll go, wait a minute, there's these incredible beats, like there's this incredible jazzy feel. There are these like Rhodes, like electric pianos and stuff. And the back there, that bass on the wall, that jazz bass, the bassist of Opeth is like one of the reasons why I got a jazz bass in the first place. Like the whole feel of that band is so much more than death metal. But I hope you can see from what I'm laying down here is that death metal it's a vehicle to do all kinds of things. And I think they had that insight early on where most death metal bands didn't. I think most death metal bands lean into that percussiveness to a much greater degree. Like I think of bands like Cannibal Corpse are like that, right? It's very much like dun, 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 kind of feel that. Again, it's a turn off for a lot of people. I love that as well. I love that kind of death metal too. But Opeth was like a band that really saw the potential for like exploding out these incredible melodic explorations because they were no longer limited by the like having to follow vocal melodies. They did do vocal melodies, like they have clean vocals as well, but they mix between really heavy death metal sections and then also these like more kind of instrumentally mellow, usually clean vocal sections. And that contrast, just like with the Beatles, people talk about the light and shade, especially in the context of the songwriting of John Lennon and Paul McCartney. That light and shade is so powerful for creating compelling music. So Opeth found a way to do that with death metal mixed with like jazzy, bluesy, and even sort of like folksy, choral kind of like stuff. So Ghost Reveries, go check that out. I think that's really them at the peak of their powers in terms of this style of songwriting. They did that for a long time, and then in, I think it was 2000, I want to say 2008, like when Watershed was released. They basically did their last death metal record, and it was really, really good. It was a fantastic album. And I think at a certain point, they just decided it was time to move on. And this is actually something, so they decided, when I say they decided to move on, they decided to make other music that didn't have death metal vocals in it, okay? So they started with an album called Heritage. It's an album that I love. I think it's a really good album too. But it was conspicuously lacking in death metal vocals. And so what this meant in like the brass tacks of the music writing, because that's what I'm trying to really emphasize here, it meant that the way that they wrote songs fundamentally changed. And I think it's fair to say that their lead singer and the author, like the creative visionary of the project, called Michael Ackerfeld, the way he was writing songs now changed. And this is not necessarily something that I think he was conscious of, but you can definitely hear it, that even though the quintessential Opeth isms are still there, the way that the songs were put together had to change to accommodate the fact that the death metal part was now conspicuously absent. And some fans were not pleased with this at all. I'll put a link to Michael Ackerfeld's interview with Ola Englund, which came out a couple of months ago, and I think it's like a promotional thing for the release of this upcoming album. And Ola in the first 1.5 minutes of the interview is like, so what about why are you bringing back death metal growls, right? And you can see that Michael Ackerfeld is a bit like, oh, for fuck's sake, like he's aware of it and he's sick of it. Like, and I totally get that. He doesn't like this whole, like the fans turned on him because he didn't want to do his death metal growls anymore. And now he's doing his death metal growls again and everyone's like so excited. And I think if you look at it in that really reductionistic way, like it would be really fucking annoying if you were put in that situation. And this is not unique to this band in terms of like heavy metal culture at large. I've seen this happen to quite a few bands. Probably the most famous example would be Metallica, when they moved on from like thrash metal, which is the genre in which I think they really published their magnum opus, which is like arguably Master of Puppets or Ride the Lightning. Like they had like a string of albums that were really heavy and really, really good and like epitomized the band. And then they sort of went in a slightly more hard rock, like classic songwriting direction with the Black Album, which was still good, but was not quite what Metallica used to be. And then they really took a hard stylistic change with Load and Reload, which were kind of felt more like a hard rock thing. Like they were trying to do like stuff that Pearl Jam and like a few other bands that were their contemporaries at that time were doing. And the perception was that the fans were somehow up in arms that their beloved hyper aggressive, hyper metal, heavy metal messiahs were now, turncoating to try to be, I guess, what was perceived as like more mainstream or like a softer sound, right? Sort of like limp dick version of Metallica or whatever. I mean, I'm reading between the lines here, but I think it's fair to say that there was a little a little bit of that kind of grumpity grump, almost adolescent frustration with the change in direction. And there was, and so Michael Ackerfeld points this out in the interview, that when they started touring this Heritage album with no death metal vocals in it, he, that being Michael, genuinely felt that there was a hostility now among the fan base, and that they were like, how dare you do this? And he said, people threatened them. People told him to his face that the band was dead to them now. And one guy, which I thought was hilarious, challenged him to a duel, right? Like, it was like life or death level, outrage. And he said, well, okay, I think it's that, well, paraphrasing here, or sort of reading between the lines, I think this sort of alienated him somewhat from the fan base, but it brought the band closer together, because it was the bassist who basically said, look, we should not just keep doing death metal, we should go in a new direction. And that was very liberating for Michael Ackerfeld, who had been doing death metal for decades at that point, and was like, all right, I think you're right. I think it's time to go in a different direction. Now, but you can see this is like reductionistic. It's like, oh, death metal growls, oh, and it comes across like very childish, but there is something that the music has been lacking since the departure of this style of vocals. And I think it's actually, I think you can see where I'm going with this, it's actually a songwriting thing. It's not the case that the reason that the music has been suffering is just because, some childish fans just want to hear him growling like the Cookie Monster, and now he's not doing that anymore. It's actually a ground up way, or it's actually a ground up consequence of the fact that the verses, bridges, choruses, sections that have vocals are no longer as free to move around melodically as they once were. So the songwriting style has changed. So now I want to make a prediction about this album. The album's called The Last Will and Testament, and there are 2 songs that have been released on it so far. Singles, I guess you'd say. And again, it's going to be released on the 22nd of November, so 3 days from the recording of this video. And in my view, those 2 songs are not at the level of like Golden Era Opeth. I just think they're not as good. Now, you could totally say, well, they're just more experimental. In a sense, I think that's true. But I actually think this is sort of like this jarring thing where Opeth has been writing songs in a more conventional way for so many years now, and so many albums. I think now there's an attempt to like reintegrate the old songwriting style. And I think it's actually presenting legitimate creative challenges. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, my prediction is that this album is going to have mixed reviews. Like, I think it's going to be a very challenging album. I don't think there are going to be a lot of fans from the golden era who say, oh, well, this is, right back to what we wanted. In fact, there might be a few, probably, again, much to the chagrin of Michael Ackerfeld, that will basically say, oh, well, you brought back the death metal, but I still don't like it that much, right? So my take is that this might, because again, it's sort of it's in the name, The Last Will and Testament. This actually might be Opeth's last album. I I'm not sure of that, of course, and I'm also not sure that it's even going to get mixed reviews. Maybe everyone will say will love it. I know I will love it for what it is. That's what I always try to do with albums when I can. It's not necessarily going to be my favorite Opeth record. I'm not even necessarily going to love it, but I am really going to try to do my best to enjoy it for what it is. But my fear, it's not necessarily a fear, it's more just an inkling, is that it's going to be taken as an attempt to capitulate to the fan base, and it's going to be received unfavorably regardless, and that's going to generate and perpetuate a sentiment in the band that the fan base is ungrateful, and perhaps worse still, that they're really not able to appreciate Michael's genius and the rest of the band's genius, because they're all incredible musicians. So I think that's my read. Like, I think I don't think it's actually about the growls. I think it's about the songwriting style that comes from the growls, and the fact the band's a little bit rusty at actually doing that now. Or maybe they just do genuinely want to make some weird and wild off the wall thing, which Michael Ackerfeld actually references in the same interview. I recommend you watch it, in which he says, like, he almost is tempted to troll the fan base by making a death metal album that sucks. And I personally don't think he could make an album that sucks if he tried. But it could be that there is a part of him that has tried with this album to make something that is not going to be received well, because it's not accessible despite having death metal vocals. I have that feeling from the two singles that have been released. Like, they're very weird. One is much weirder than the other. So is that it? I think so. I hope I've given you like a rundown of why death metal is important, and encourage you to hopefully check out Opeth, Ghost Reveries, Ghost Reveries, whatever. Fantastic album, absolutely like masterpiece. If you do love that album, then I would encourage you to go and check out Still Life and Blackwater Park and Watershed as well. So it's really is some of the best music ever written by human beings, in my humble opinion. Okay, so that's the end of the video. Thanks a bunch for watching if you've heard me out. I'm trying to rally up a bunch of subscribers because I do want to keep this train going. I think I've got a good thing going with this channel for my own mental health, I guess you would say, but also in terms of like actually offering some value to the world. I think this is a good thing. So hit subscribe, hit like, support me in any way that you can. And I'll see you in the next one. I send you my love.